No problem. And for those that are just tuning in, I just want to welcome everyone to the Living on Purpose podcast. This is a very special podcast for me because I get to interview Sera Beak. First of all, Sarah, I know you've heard this 1,000 times. I have to say, I love your work. Your work is raw, edgy, and something as simple as the color carries so much meaning for you and your work. And that's what kind of pulled me into it. I saw it online, I saw the colors, and I was kind of pulled in. Something deep within me was pulled in, and it wasn't just the lovely picture you have on your website, but the colors are deep and rich, And then I started digging, and I just saw all of this soulful stuff. Where's all this come from? Take us into your story.
Well, it comes from my heart, and it definitely comes from my soul, and it's been years of excavation and exploration, and having to really go through some intense times, like many of us do, in order to uncover our souls and to see who we are and to dare to actually share that with other people. So my story isn't so different from other people's. It's that same sort of motivation of like, why am I here? What am I here to express? And how do I do it in the most authentic way possible? And so that, for me, happens to be the color or the energy of red. And yeah, so that's what I offer.
And I have to say, and I feel, I actually feel free with your work as opposed to some of the others. Like, your work makes me want to say words like shit or damn and hell, and it be okay,
Good.
if that means something. You understand what I'm saying?
I do. Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's a lot of us who've been in around the spiritual arena for a while. Like, sometimes our natural voice starts to get affected by what we might think is like a more proper or spiritual way to be speaking.
Right.
And I think part of this process for me has been about freeing up my authentic voice. And sometimes the swear words, like that has to be there. It's just like a natural expression of my soul. And I was like, it's here for a reason. So I hope that does, help every other person out there just be like, you know what? If this feels real for me, if this feels like the best way to express this right now, I'm just gonna do it.
I know. What's your definition of soul as opposed to spirit? Because I think that's really good to get out there for folks.
Yeah, good question. For me, soul tends to have a more embodied and distinct feeling to it. It's more the core of our individual selves. And it's something that usually soul work is more of a downward, like a descent into the body, into the world, into your psyche, into your shadows, into your very being. Spirit, more often than not, through my perspective, tends to sort of push us up and out sometimes. It has more of a transcendent feel and an ethereal feel. And it tends to have sayings that are more like, we are one with everything, and merging back into source and losing yourself, and both of them are really important to experience. But I've noticed that more often than not, in traditional religion and in mainstream spirituality, spirit is the one that dominates and kind of gets more cred, and soul is the one that's sort of the messy, muddy, like bloody crawl, and that one doesn't really get as much airtime because it's not as light and freeing. It's more intense, and it doesn't have a lot of glittering self-help promises to the work. There's not a lot of guarantees, it's more just like your guarantee is that you are doing the work to find your soul, and that should be enough, but it doesn't really have the like instant abundance or soulmate or happiness, tag on it. So.
Oh my God, and I think that's so perfectly well stated. Where does your work come? What pulls you down here in the trenches with the rest of us? I mean, because there's just so many teachers out there, and their work is all. And there's nothing wrong with good packaging. Now, don't get me wrong. But I mean, it's so up there, and it's like you wonder, do they have any kids? Like, have they been divorced? Like, has anybody broken their heart? Has everything been yes for them? What about underemployment? Have they ever worked a regular job?
No, it's true. I mean, I think that's the sort of interesting thing is I think they have. I think they do have kids. I know they've gone through hardships, but there's this weird sort of, spiritual code or something that ends up happening where a lot of people end up not sharing that quite as much, or they'll share a hardship if they're a spiritual teacher, but there's still a little bit of a distance between them and their audience of just being like, I am a real messy human that is on this awkward, divinely human process just like you are, and here's what I've learned. Does this make me better than you? No, it just means that like this is what I've learned right now. And I think I noticed it in myself, when I was in the arena like 7 years ago when my first book came out. I felt that tension. I felt that. I remember before I went to my very first book reading, I was coached. This is just an example of what I'm talking about. But I was coached by this master presenter of how I should be presenting my spiritual work to the world. And I left the meeting so stressed out. And I remember I got in the car and I like burst into tears. And I was like, I am not cut out for this work.
Oh,
like
man.
I can't do this. And the 5 minutes before I walked into my very first book reading, it was in New York City, and I was so nervous, and I was holding all these notes of what I was supposed to do and how I was supposed to present and what I was supposed to sound like. And I remember I passed this garbage can, and it was like my body automatically just turned and threw the notes in the garbage can. I didn't even know what I was doing. And I walked in, and I was just like, look, y'all, like, I'm scared. I am nervous. This is my first book reading. If I don't pass out, that's like a success. But I just want to be real with you all about where this is coming from. And something clicked in that moment for me that is the most safest and soulful place for me to be is transparent with people and just real. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I do see that, within myself, that tension, we're supposed to look a certain way or we're supposed to sound a certain way versus just being ourselves. And just to expand it a little bit more, I think that's part of also a paradigm on this planet that separates the divine from the human. And I think one of the things that I find really, compelling and very motivating for me is collapsing that distinction. And we hear about that all the time, but really, what does that look like for us to be like the fully engaged, like messy human who is dealing with real issues and at the same time is able to hold the fact that they are also a divine being? What does that look like?
Yeah. It's like, I can't remember the TV show. There was a television show. I can't remember the name of it. And the whole entire town reminded you of Area 51 because you had people working at gas stations and all of these crazy, just normal odd jobs, right? But they were neuroscientists and like academics and, just all of this incredible stuff. They were extraordinary, regular, ordinary human beings, if that makes sense,
I love that. Yeah. And that's us, I mean, that's kind of why I think also like the superhero movies are, touch so many people because I think there's this recognition that each one of us has these like authentic spiritual superpowers, and we are these like extraordinary beings who are right now like incarnate, like we're human and we're these ordinary humans that are like dealing with this stuff. So it strikes a chord, with all of us. I think we remember, we remember who we are.
Right. So I have to ask you this question. Tell us a bit about the whole Redvolution movement. I mean, your work is, of course, it's a hell of a brand, I have to say. And I do feel good being able to say this stuff around you, because your work is liberating like that. But at the end of the day, it's really soulful, and really like earthy and really grounded. It's freeing and liberating. Where does the whole idea of Redvolution come from and red ladies?
Yeah. Redvolution was just one of the words that like popped into my brain when I was trying to come up for a name for the very first time I was asked to do a workshop, and it was just like everything red for me. It felt just very natural, like it was just like I was breathing. That word just sort of popped up and out as that's the word for this movement. And what I was doing before I went into the red tent, before I sort of had my big red night of the soul a few years ago, before that, I was really into the Revolution movement. I was creating a Revolution film. Everything was like about this movement that I felt was this real divine, feminine, grounded, fiery, authentic expression on this planet for men and women. But after I went through this Red Night of the Soul, I really began to understand that I don't want people hopping on like my bandwagon, and I actually like debranded it. I didn't want it to be a brand because I actually understood that that word came from my soul as a description of what I am doing here. Like for me, it is a revolution, just to be myself publicly for people, and it scares me and it pushes all my buttons, and it's something that's really my heart's movement. But I'm less interested in getting people onto my red trip, and I'm so much more passionate, like where it is for me is like, what is your trip? What is your feeling or color? What is the name of your distinct divine being? I call mine the Red Lady, but I don't want to turn anybody into a Red Lady. Like that is not why I'm here. It might have been why I thought I was here at the beginning, but I know now. I know now what is here, and there's so many things out there sort of pushing us in different directions, and what I hope, like my sincere prayer with my work, is that I'm pushing you back in your own direction. That everything that I am doing, and if there's a workshop or anything like that in this book, I want you to be looking at yourself, not to be focused on what's Sera doing or what's so-and-so doing or that person doing.
And I totally love that. I mean, and it's actually right on time. I mean, we're in a vampire culture where vampires, aren't evil, they're cool. And Game of Thrones has a red priestess, who's kicking butt, and so this is sort of like the time for it, It's like the world is calling for that authenticity that you talked about.
Right, and the vampirism you're mentioning it's strong out there, and I have to say, like, part of that was something I had to look at with my own shadow when I went into this Red Night of the Soul. I was just, like, my career in spirituality was really shooting off. It was, through many perspectives, it was looking very successful, and then I had this realization that I had been losing my soul along the way, and so I stopped everything, and part of what I had to really look at for the past 3.5 years was shadow stuff, and some of the shadow, which was, shadow is unconscious, but it's kind of part of this collective mainstream spiritual movement as well, where it's like you want people to be in your movement, and part of it is because you're getting energy from them. Like you are in this weird way feeding off their attention and feeding off them wanting to be like you or take your classes or things like that. And even though it's couched in this spiritual awakening language and the intention behind it could be pure, there's also this shadow side going on in mainstream spiritual arena, and I was participating in that unconsciously, and becoming conscious of it, I was just like, holy shit, I have no interest in sucking the life force out of any of these people anymore. There's no way I want to do that, and I'm not interested in it anymore. And where does that come from? And for most of us, it comes from wounds where like we need attention or we want to be loved. It's like the classic childhood wounds that every spiritual teacher has. I don't care who they are. So it's just becoming real with that stuff and talking about it and seeing that it's a part of this mainstream spiritual culture, and then making the decisions and the conscious choices to not do that anymore.
I know, and I so understand what you're talking about, and I know everybody that's going to tune in would, because there is that shadow side of it. It's like you have a responsibility as a teacher, and what's even scarier is that when you come down from teaching or you're in a workshop and there are people who have severe psychological disorders, they've been raped, traumatized, who have severe, personality things or even physical ailments, and they're listening to what you're saying, trying to get hope and stuff from it. So it's like you really do have a responsibility not to just give them BS, but to really come from a pure place and really know what you're talking about. Like you've lived it and it works.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And recognizing where you can't help
Yes.
Like really getting clear. For me, it's been like really getting clear with like what is it that is my particular like gig? Like what is it that my soul is here to do? And when I try to go into other departments,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't work well. So being able to also say like this work is not for everyone, and I don't pretend that it is, and I know it can't help certain things, and I'm not going to try to like glitter it up to make you feel like it is going to help you if it's not. And also the work, the soul work to me is, like I said before, it doesn't have all these promises. It's like actually soul work puts you in your own personal hell for a long time. And if you have the stamina to be there and to face your shit and to really like breathe into the love that's still present, then okay, like then we're gonna keep walking. But it's not this like it's not for everyone, and I do feel. Or, I mean, I think soul work is for everyone, but I think my particular work isn't for everyone. And I say that because I actually honor the organic process that each soul has to go through here.
Yes.
Where some souls are like, hey, I'm ready for this piece now. Other souls are like, I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to try to abuse that and seduce you and make you feel like you are ready for that when your soul is like, no, that's not my gig right now.
Yes. And I think that is a very powerful statement. You said something like that in the book, and I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but the title of the book is Red, Hot, and Holy, A Heretic's Love Story. And for those that are tuning in, you have to check out this book. Go and storm your bookstores. It's already out. The cover is lovely, by the way. It's really cool. It's really cool, and it does pull you in, and it's enticing. Tell us a bit about the book and your journey into writing it.
Yeah, I had a contract to write another book, actually a book called Red Revolution,
Mm-hmm.
and I started to go through this red night of the soul where I really recognized that I had been losing my soul the past years, and so I stopped everything and pulled away from about 95% of my professional and social life and went into what I call the red cocoon, which is like a physical and spiritual tent.
Mm-hmm.
So the red tent, red cocoon. And I started just, everything started to kind of get dismantled for me. Like, my crap, my truth, like who I am, what I'm doing here on this planet. Like everything really started to get like shaken on purpose, and it needed to be. And so there was a lot of questioning, and in that process I started to write, and it wasn't what the publisher wanted. The publisher wanted a more like self-help version of a book, and that wasn't what was coming out of me. What was coming out of me was more of like a personal story, mixed with some, with some heretical aspects. And so I got to a very intense point where eventually I had to make this decision if I wanted to write this book or stay true to my contract. And so I had to, I ended up breaking contract with the publisher and losing my livelihood and losing really like my kind of professional writer's reputation in
Oh
many
my
ways,
God.
because breaking a contract with a publisher is just, it's not good. It's kind of like getting a big like, X stamped on your resume.
And you know what? I thank you so much for owning that truth and then for releasing it to us, because there's so many people that are listening and that are just out there in the world. They have to make big decisions in their lives, and sometimes they make decisions and then you deal with, was it right? Was it wrong? It felt good. And it's like, how do you get clear about stuff like that?
Totally. And that's exactly what this was. I mean, so much of it, I was like, oh my God, is this right? Is this wrong? Is this crazy? Especially when it's like costing me my livelihood. Am I being insane? Like all of that stuff is there. And I do feel like underneath all that, like, and they're legit and they're practical concerns. So I'm not trying to gloss that over, but I do also really know from experience, as I'm sure you do, and I'm sure many of your listeners do, is that there is some part of our soul that knows we have to make this decision. And our ego will do like so many crazy things around it. Like, if you do that, that will happen. If you do that, that will happen. And those things might happen. But my true sense, and I'm not just saying this in a fluffy way, is that if that impulse is coming from your soul and you can feel it in your body, you can just feel that like this is just not working for you anymore, and it's real, there is and there will be things that will show up to support you. So it's going to feel like jumping off a cliff. It's going to feel like you're crazy. Your friends and family might think you're crazy. Like, all of that might happen, but something in your soul, your heart, your belly, your feet is like, I really think I got to do this. And it's not going to be super clear for a while. I mean, that's kind of the craziness I feel like with soul work is it's not always like, oh, I did it and now I know I made the best decision. No, it's like there's months where I was like, what the hell did I do? You know, waking up at like 2 a.m, like sweating, you know, like holy shit. And now I know, you know, like years later, I can see so clearly that I had to do it, that it was and everything is about freeing my soul here. And that thing was clamping down on it. And it was a perfect, you know, projection. It was a perfect thing. It was perfectly suited for me. And I feel like anything that we're being tested or any challenges that come up, they're perfectly prescribed, you know, by your soul. They're like, what is that thing that is going to trigger you, that's going to bring up all your fears and make you not want to go in your soul's direction? It's going to show up. And then we start getting better able to be like, oh, this is one of those things because it's scaring the hell out of me, and I can still feel this other, you know, authentic pull. So this is one of those challenges. And actually, if I can let the challenge sort of melt in front of me, like kind of let go of what it looks like on the outside for a moment and see that, oh, this is really, am I claiming my soul or am I losing my soul? That's actually what this experience is about right now. Everything else is details, and I know there's practical things we all have to deal with, but in those moments, that can help us make the decision.
Yes. Talk to us a bit about, and the listeners, about the Cali energy that shows up. Because, I mean, your book is very personal. And the reason why I loved it, I've read almost like half of it. I still have a couple chapters to go, but that's only in 2 days because I couldn't put it down. It's like you're having a conversation with someone, and it's very real and revealing. But can you tell us a bit about that Cali energy that showed up? You mentioned there was an incident with you and the filmmaker, and I believe it was Andrew Young. I might be getting the name wrong. But I'm bringing that up because, like you said, whenever we aren't authentic, life has a way of, in a sense, balancing us out, so to speak.
Yes, so much, yeah. And for me, life screams at me very loudly. So I was about to do an interview for the film that I was created called Revolution with this amazing mystic scholar named Andrew Harvey, and he's phenomenal. He's a sacred activist, and just he's great. And right when I was about to like put the mic on him and start the camera rolling, he started yelling at the filmmaker and I, like full force. Like it was so volcanic and like, but at the same time, and this is, I mean, I don't know, I haven't been around that many people where they're just like completely blowing you out, like, but at the same time, as much as like your body is like, oh my God, what's happening? It was so clear in my heart and in my soul that he was being a mouthpiece. And for me in that moment, you know, I really recognized it as a mouthpiece of Kali, who's this Hindu goddess of creation and destruction, and she is forceful, and she does not take any shit, and she is here for the real deal. And that's what it felt like it was coming through Andrew. And he really just put me in my place and was like, why are you making this film with him? What are you doing with your career out in the world? Like, don't be patriarchy's puppet. Don't buy into all this mainstream spiritual, like, consumerism bullshit.
Right.
Like, get real. You're talking about the feminine. Don't sell out. Don't become a sex object. Like, this whole thing came out, and it was so in my face that I got it. And the other piece I want to say that's important here, and it's always been really important to me, every single thing that Andrew Harvey channeled to me, I had been writing about in my journal for years, like suspiciously. I had been like, I knew this, like I felt this. I knew something was off with the filmmaker and I knew something did not feel right about turning Red into a brand. I knew that this big surge of success that was currently happening, like something about it didn't feel right, but I couldn't tell what it was. And also I felt like, well, I want to bring my divine work out to more people. Like, I want to help them connect with the divine more and more and more. Like, why is that wrong? You know, so there are all these conflicting things going on, and he just gave it to me straight, and it was exactly what I needed, and it confirmed my own intuitions and really, really help me stop, and press pause and really reflect and
Oh my God.
make some changes.
Oh my God. And it hit me, and it's like when folks read it, it'll hit them wherever they are, because I mean, when it comes, you don't resist it because it's like an out picturing of your own mind. you know.
It so is. You're like, hello, reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you, in a sense, move on with that? Because, like you said, there is a world out there, and you have to, in a sense, do what you have to do. And there's so many people, and I know you've seen them too. They've lived on the edge, and it's unfortunate because everybody around them suffers. There's a point in your book in which you kind of put that disclaimer out there, and you're like, "Listen, guys, okay, I'm single. I don't have any kids. Blase, 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 and this is my journey, and I have the leisure to be able to do this." But then there's so many people that try to, not saying you can't get out there and surf on the waters, but they try to surf the way that you surf when they don't have your experiences. So, Kali shows up for them in a real way, but sometimes in a very cruel way. But they put themselves in that circumstance,
Yeah, no, I definitely hear you, and it's really important for us to keep checking in and become familiar with how it is that our soul is communicating and what is the actual path that our soul is nudging us along, because it's paradoxical, because on one hand it is going to look like we are taking this huge risk at certain points on our soul path, and that's just because that's part of the journey. It's part of us learning to trust ourselves and learning to trust our souls, and that our souls can carry us even when things look really crazy on the outside. But what I will say also is that I do believe that doesn't mean that you are going to be destitute on the street.
Right.
And if that starts creeping up, I would definitely say this might not be your soul.
Right.
You're talking about. This actually might be a spiritualized ego or a complex or something else that is sort of masquerading as your soul. This might be an unhealthy aspect of your own personality that's creeping up. This might be a psychological thing. And I'm not trying to throw all that in just to complexify everything and make people stressed out. That's not the point, but I really do believe that these events in our lives are perfectly prescribed. And I know so many people who have gone through dark nights of the soul and had a family and had a 9-to-5 job and had a mortgage, and they were able to do it.
Yes.
Because there was something in that they were like, okay, so I'm going to have to pull back maybe on this, but I am going to be able to do this. Or maybe their partner or a relative can see that, you know what, for that month, I'm actually going to kick in something to help them with the mortgage for them. I don't know, but what I end up getting from people, the more I talk to people about this, is there is some sort of safety net that we do know is there, and that is concrete, and that is practical. And this isn't some ideal, just follow your bliss and then, screw your family. And,
right.
That's not what this is at all. And actually, the soul will, if it's really the soul you're dealing with, it will not let you escape your ordinary life. That's not the point, It's going to make you face your ordinary life and take your soul by the hand at the same time.
Yes, and I am glad you said that. Sometimes you, like I said, you walk through the bookstore and you look at those books and you're like, what in the world? Not to say stereotypes or, but every stereotype there is about wealthy people, it's like, what about the rest of the world? Those books they're only catered, first of all, to people who can afford to take time off throughout the day and not work and go and read them, but.
Exactly. No, exactly. And that's, it's something that you have to recognize and admit. And, in the fire hazards, my introduction in the book, it's I think it's the second or third one in there where I'm like, look, I am a white, Western, and middle-class woman who is I have the time, this is an incredible privilege that I have gotten to be able to dive into my soul, and I recognize that, and I respect it, and I treat it so seriously, and I don't have all the answers why I was born into my circumstance or how things started happening in this particular way. But I say in the book, it was odd, and this is sort of the way I've noticed, and I know other people noticed that things work. Where right before my big crash, I had two friends who donated a nice sum of money to my Revolution work. And if that money wasn't there, I don't know what would have happened during that time. It was this very, it was this total act of surprise and grace. And throughout this, it's been, I think there's something that just starts happening where the soul work that you're doing, it becomes such a priority that you will do whatever you can to support it. So kind of paradoxically, if that means you do need to take an extra shift, if that means that you do need to stay up late on those nights where you would rather sleep, like there is a force that starts to come alive in you that actually is going to provide you with that energy and that ability to do so.
Yeah, and you know what I loved about your work? First of all, I have to tell everybody that there is no classism in Sera Beak's work, okay? When you read it, it will meet you right where you are, and you are open and vulnerable about where you are. And so you can kind of, it's like looking in a mirror. The work that you're talking about, where it's like you get up twice as early, and you still, I mean, that's true across the board. You can't but admit that it's true. So my question to you is, Sera, what's success to you? Like what makes you happy at the end of the day with the work and stuff that you're doing? Because there's so many people like that. It's like this dichotomy where you try to find happiness and then you go out and do something fulfilling, but then you lose that happiness inwardly because you're trying to, in a sense, work. How do you find that balance? If that's the right question.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's something I think for me, I know for me, I'm still learning how to balance all of that. But I do know for me that success is when I am connected fully with my soul, and I know that whatever I am doing, that connection is there, and I am not giving it away, I'm not selling it out, I'm not violating it, I'm not forgetting it, I'm not trying to squish it down, I am not trying to shove it away, but I'm making space for it. I'm making room in my life for it. And I don't always know what that's going to look professionally. I do know part of my journey has to be public because it's how my soul is learning, like the deep, heavy shit. And it's particular to my being. It's not because I want to be public. It's because that is what brings up both my shadows and my light. And I have to face those this time around. So the balance or the success is, I mean, I'll just say, like, last night I gave a talk and I hadn't given one in like a year and a half because I'm a very nervous public speaker, and I remember being up there on stage and I was like, it's a success if I don't pass out when I'm on stage. It's the same thing with the book readings. It's like that's success to me. But there was something at the end where before anybody came up, and it's, you don't know. Like, I have no idea if what I did was quote unquote successful, or it touched people, or it reminded people of their own souls. Like, I have no idea. I hope so. Like, that's my prayer. That's my intention for what I'm doing. But at the end, what I knew as I was like stepping shakily off the stage was that I was with my soul the whole time I was on stage.
Yes.
That when I was there, that's the place I was speaking from. And that's an accomplishment for me because I often would chuck my soul off the window like years ago. And so anyway, I know that's sort of a long answer to it, but I do know that for each of us, like that becomes the measure of success now for me. Like when I look at people, it's not just their accomplishments or how many people they've affected or, I mean, those are great and they're wonderful goals to have, but it's more like, are they hugging their soul so close that nothing is coming between them?
Yes.
And whether that looks like something grand in public, or that looks like a meal they just made for their family, or a conversation they just had with a loved one, or a walk in the park with their dog, like that is where it's at. Because everything on this planet, or a lot of things on this planet, are about pulling us away from our soul and pulling us and distracting us and confusing us and disempowering us through subtle things like the media. I mean, there's so many things out there we're constantly faced with on a daily basis. So to have that reunion, to extend that invitation to your soul to be with you throughout all that, that is a success for me.
Yes. Oh my God. How can we get a hold of your book, and what's your website?
Yeah, it's serabeak.com, and it's spelled SERABEAK.com. And the book comes out July 1st, but it's available. People can pre-order it or order it then if they want. It's on Amazon. I should be in bookstores, but I don't know.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Thank you for my copy, though.
Yeah, no. I'm glad we got you a copy. We were missing some early copies, so I'm glad it got to you. But yeah, it comes out July 1st. Yeah, so it'll be available then.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I just want to say on air, thank you for joining me for this podcast. I know it's going to bless everyone. Folks, the podcast will be up. It'll be available everywhere. You can follow me online at Twitter, at jessherriott.com. Check out Sera Beak's website. Bring her in to teach, book her for a workshop, buy all of her books because it's awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
been so great. So wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much.
Beautiful.